What inspired you both to do this project? Well, Griff, do you want to tell us about Spared and Shared?
Yeah, I'd like to try to take advantage of every opportunity I can to talk about Spared and Shared and make sure that people are aware of it, because I think it's a great resource. What it is 15 years ago when I retired, I worked in the scientific field, and so my passion has always been history. But when I retired, I wanted to do something meaningful with the rest of my life. So I started looking at, of all places, eBay, which was popular at the time. A lot of people were selling letters and diaries on eBay, and as I looked at this, it looked like there was a tremendous amount of history being bought and sold there. And oftentimes, the letters that were being posted there, sometimes they would have the scans of the letters, and I would be able to read them and see that there was some significant material there. But the people who were selling the letters oftentimes didn't identify what that significance was. In fact, it didn't even seem necessarily that they cared what regiment these soldiers were from or whatever. And it looked like, I thought this is crazy. Here's significantly historical material that's being taken from somebody's closet or attic and being sold on eBay and going into somebody else's closet or attic, and we're missing out on all this opportunity to collect this information and share it with the public.
The letters in this book really speak to some of the important debates that we as historians have.
One of the interesting things I noticed as I was reading these is some of the references to Lincoln's physical appearance, and it seems like it comes up a decent amount. Some admired him, but others, of course, not. And how does that tell us about how people at the time viewed political leaders?
It's my impression from most of the letters that I've read, especially looking at them chronologically in time throughout the Lincoln administration, is those that were inclined to sort of ridicule his appearance tended to do that early in the war when they had little knowledge of his ability. In fact, most people, some people I think even from Springfield, question his ability to rise to the occasion when the country was crumbling apart, felt that this was not a man who was going to be capable of accomplishing much of anything. I think there was great concern at the time. And so, if you have that kind of an opinion about a person's ability, you're, I think, more apt to ridicule their appearance, correct? And so there was a lot of that, actually, that wasn't confined to letters. It was written in publication in newspapers all the time. So, but I think as the years went on, I think you find that there was less criticism of Lincoln's appearance. Most people who came to know him, I think, especially those who came to know him well, came to recognize his ability and leadership that was probably not apparent to the average person. What I enjoy most about these letters is, you've probably heard people say that how great it would be to go back in time and experience life at the time, at least to interact with people and find out what they had to say. And for me, these letters give me that opportunity better than any other thing that I can think of. Because it's like sitting down with somebody at a table and say, tell me about how you think the war is going, or tell me what you think of Abraham Lincoln. And so their honest opinions are shared. And the nice thing is it's that snapshot in time. If the letter was written in 1863, it's how they felt at that particular time. As John said, opinions changed through the war. But at that particular time, it's like sitting at the table, as I said, and they're sharing that information with you. So for me, when I open up these letters, I never know every day when I open up letters what I'm going to get, but it's like a window into time where I'm talking or communing with somebody from that period of time, and it's the closest thing I can think of to being there, So I take more satisfaction, enjoyment out of doing that, frankly, than I do sitting down and reading a book, which, you know, draws from people's writings, of course, but shares a great deal of what the author's opinion is based on all the readings that they've done of primary sources. But this book, you won't find any of Jonathan's or my opinions in this book about Lincoln. You have to go into the book and read the opinions of all these people who wrote these letters, because all these are excerpts of letters where there's references to Lincoln, and you get a sense for how people really felt about Lincoln. And there were people that despised him, and we didn't try to cull that out of the book at all. It's all in there. Anybody that had anything that powerful that they wanted to say, those statements are in there. And as I said, some people really despised him and wrote terrible things about him, but you'll learn that. You know, we tend to, I think, when we were growing up, we heard these stories about Lincoln, and we never got much exposure to that negative side of Lincoln. Most of what we learned when we were in grade school and high school and all that kind of stuff were all of his accomplishments and the powerful things and how he was the right leader. But we don't hear about what those people thought of him at the time that they were experiencing his administration, and this book will share that kind of thing.
Yeah, you know, we didn't curate this collection, to Griff's point. We didn't go through and pick and choose. We just put in everything we got, and we arranged it chronologically so that you get a Northern woman, and then a Confederate soldier, and then a child from Missouri, and then a Northern politician, and then, you know, it goes from voice to voice to voice to voice. And I want to read you just a little bit of the index entries for Abraham Lincoln. So there are about 15 or 20 subheadings, and the first one is appeared careworn. Another one is considered good-looking. And the next one is considered unattractive. And then it goes on from there. You know, one guy described Lincoln as looking like a shark. I don't know quite what that means. Another one said he saw him come into Congress one day, into the galleries, and said he appeared as sly as a cat. Another person said that smallpox couldn't disfigure him. I mean, now, Michael will appreciate this. For the Mary subheadings, we have considered disloyal and physical appearance of. One person who saw Mary in New York City said well, actually, I'll read you the words. He said, "I have just come from the barracks in City Hall Park, where the volunteers were drawn up." This is May 17th, 1861. "Drawn up in line around a square space, and Mrs. Lincoln walked inside, reviewing them. But she is quite fine looking, but was, shall I tell it, oh my, painted too much." In other words, she had too much makeup on. And Griff alluded to this diary entry. It's from November 11th, 1860. And I should say, out of the book, probably about 90% of the documents are from Spared and Shared, and then we added in a few things that I had found in my research. So this is one, and this is held at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. So Anna Ridgely was a young woman in Springfield. She was from a Democrat family, and her relatives in Maryland were slaveholders. So she's not a fan of Lincoln's. And writing just 5 days after the election of 1860, she wrote, "Wednesday morning we heard of Mr. Lincoln's election. We were disappointed, for we had hoped that such a man as he, without the least knowledge of state affairs, without any polish of manners, would not be sent to be the representative of this great nation. But so it is by illegal voting that he is elected our president." So she is not a fan of Lincoln. But then a few months later, Lincoln holds sort of a going away reception at his home just down the street from here. And Anna Ridgely goes to that. And let me just pull up what she wrote on that day. She said this: "We did not stay long. I had some conversation with Mrs. Lincoln. She was dressed in a pear-colored antique, something, I don't know the French word, with pearls and point lace. Mr. Lincoln really looked handsome to me. His whiskers are a great improvement, and he had such a pleasant smile, I could not but admire him." I thought, what a great change in this young woman, the way she was I think she was about 18 at the time. She was a young woman. You know, she goes from thinking Lincoln is going to be a terrible leader to, you know, he grew whiskers, he looks okay now. And these are the kind of voices that we were able to bring together. And I think they just, as Griff said, they make a really powerful portrait of Lincoln and his times.
You know, as an attorney, we often give far more weight to statements recounting an event when they're given right after it happened. And this book captures some interesting reactions to Lincoln's assassination in 1865. And I'm curious how you think those firsthand accounts compare to the way, certainly decades after, but even today, how we reflect on Lincoln's death.
You see in these a lot of raw accounts of how people are grappling with the news. And some of them will not be surprising. You'll see people mourning, and you know, we know that many Americans mourned as though they had lost a friend or a relative. But then you see some other aspects too. There's one letter we have where a person describes being at home and their friend came over, and their friend wanted to get a rise out of the family and said something kind of celebrating the death of Lincoln. And the father of the household basically kicks this young woman out and says, "You can't be in my home if you're gonna talk that way." And you see Southerners who are grappling with Lincoln's assassination. You see soldiers, including some, and this has been known before, but this letter had never been seen before. There were soldiers in Nashville Union soldiers, I should say, not Confederates, who celebrate Lincoln's assassination. And they get arrested and they're made to wear placards that say "Assassination Sympathizer." And you can imagine what it would be like to be a Union soldier. Lincoln has just been killed, and you have to stand in front of your comrades with this sign on. And Griff found a letter of someone describing those guys having to stand there and the effect, the moral effect that it had on soldiers who saw it. And we have the picture of that as well. There's a photograph that is in a private collection that we got permission to use that shows men, and that's a great point. I think we have about 40 or 50 images in the book, and we wanted the images to kind of put faces to some of the stories and anecdotes we tell. Can you tell about your relative who described going to the theater?
Oh, yes. What he's referring to is, I was telling him that even in my own family, which was...
Here it is, if you want it.
Oh, okay. You have to recognize that I came from a long line of Methodist ministers, and so there was a philosophy in the family of not going to the theater, not going to dances, and that kind of thing. And so one of my ancestors, writing to a sister, wrote, "I suppose you have heard about the president's being shot before this. It is so dreadful, just when peace is dawning. But if he had been to church instead of a theater, it might not have been."
Well, this kind of gets to my next question. The book does such a great job, I think, of preserving the original language, even the original spelling from the 19th century. Why do you guys think it's important to maintain these elements rather than modernizing the text for modern English?
So when I went through with my student Lainey and we did the proofreading, one of the things we did, and Griff and I kind of talked through this a little bit in the process, was with letters that were written by literate writers, we presented them with minor editorial interventions to clean things up. And so that these were writers who were well educated, they generally used correct spelling and punctuation, and so we conveyed them in that sort of way so that readers wouldn't have a hard time reading them. But then there are a number of semi-literate writers as well. And in those cases, I believe, and I've edited a lot of letters by black writers from the 19th century, you often get a sense of how a person probably spoke, because if they weren't good at spelling, then they spelled words phonetically. And so with semi-literate writers, we retained the original spellings as much as possible. Where necessary, we inserted what we believe they meant with a correctly spelled word in brackets. And then many of these semi-literate writers use no punctuation, so we followed what the Freedmen and Southern Society Project did with their many volumes of Slavery and Emancipation during the Civil War, which is where you believe there should have been a period, you put 5 blank spaces, and that allows the reader to kind of go through without being overwhelmed by a run-on sentence that runs for 2 pages or something. And I think when you read those, you really can hear the voice of these writers because they're writing how they hear the words themselves.
Yeah, this is probably an opportunity for me to mention that the reason that had to be edited or changed when the book was done is because when I publish them, letters on Spared and Shared, I will make editorial corrections for spelling. I'll add punctuation necessary. The reason I did this, and I have to go all the way back to 15 years ago when I started, is I felt for people to actually understand the letters that I needed to do that, and because some, as you said, were semi-literate. And I also, because I wanted people to be able to find these letters, if you misspell everything and put it on the internet, the internet little GoBot or whatever it is that goes through and looks for things won't find it. You know, you can't misspell Nashville and then type in Nashville and expect to find these letters if it's misspelled. So that was my rationale a long time ago, and so I've stuck with that. And people have tended to find the letters as a result of being able to do Google searches with spelling. But of course, when we collaborated on this book, John felt it was important to get it back to capture what the original spelling was by these soldiers. And the thing that I did when I published on Spared and Shared, even though I corrected the spelling, is I've always made it a policy of posting the actual scanned letter with my posting so that people could look at the original handwriting. Not only to verify that I've transcribed it correctly, but to gauge some level of understanding of the person's education, et cetera. So.
And along those lines, I just want to say, for the historians in the room, you really should use this resource and cite this resource. Include it in your footnotes so that other scholars can find it too and look at these original letters.
I've heard some references here that I can't help but think about today's times, right? Illegal voting, and obviously it's a very divisive time. What do you think the letters reveal about the divisions of Lincoln's time that could resonate or do resonate with today's America?
I think one of the things that many of us in this room know, but my students often don't, is that Lincoln was hated in his time. You know, when my students think about Lincoln, if they think about him at all, they think of either the guy on the Lincoln Memorial or the $5 bill or the penny, not for much longer, but at least for now. And they think about this person who's larger than life, who must have just been beloved. In the same way that I think a lot of Americans think about like the American founders as this unit who must have just thought the same thing and worked together to create the Declaration and the Constitution. And we forget that there were tremendous divisions among those generations of Americans. And I think in a lot of ways, these accounts and these observations of Lincoln humanize him. And they allow us to see him as Lincoln's contemporaries saw him. And that means they allow us to see him as a person who was loved by some and utterly reviled by others, and then some who hated him and grew to appreciate him. And I think that can be a useful reminder for us, because I think a lot of times in our culture today, we get so divided that we feel like it's unprecedented. I mean, if you watch the news, people are like, oh, it's never been this bad before. And it's like, well, we have had a civil war.
Yeah.
So I think that these can be a really important reminder to give us context as we think about our own time, that we've been divided as a nation before and we've overcome it. And, you know, sometimes it takes a great leader like Lincoln to be able to do that. But even in his own time, And we've got some cartoons in here, anti-Lincoln cartoons. Like there's a Lincoln and the Draft cartoon that is not favorable towards him. Like people didn't like him then. He won 55% of the popular vote in 1864. That was only in the North. If the South had voted, it wouldn't have been 55%. It would have been a lot less. And yet we remember him as our greatest president. And I think that can be really helpful for us to remember.
I can't add any more to that. It's a perfect answer. What he said.
So may I just make a comment? In Springfield, Lincoln
I don't think you're going to be audible on the recording, so
Yeah.
maybe save it for the
And I will
Q&A
say,
later.
and I will say, yeah, everybody, be sure you stick around because Michael Burlingham's going to do a wonderful Q&A with all of our speakers today later. If Lincoln could read the letters in your book today, what do you think his reaction would be?
I can say something, but if you want to go first.
Well, it isn't that he, this is my impression, not the historian that you are, but I know enough about Lincoln to know that he did read newspapers, and there were occasions, I believe, where he actually responded to some editors where he thought maybe he was being misrepresented, etc. I'm sure he heard the negative criticism. I don't know that there's anything in these letters that would have surprised him necessarily. Can you add it to
Yeah,
that?
I mean, you went to the newspapers, and that's exactly what I was thinking too. I mean, you read the newspapers of the day, and a lot of the editorial commentary in the newspapers is then going to inform what people write in their private correspondence. So some of these people who are writing nasty things about Lincoln, it's because they're reading nasty things about Lincoln, and Lincoln knew what the papers were saying. I mean, as shocking as it may be, and Michael has this in the Green Monster, and we kept it in the, what do we call the mini one? I forget. The Green Dwarf, right? I don't know if that's PC, Michael. But there's a quote that is in both editions of the book from a Wisconsin newspaper, sorry Steve Rogstadt, where you are, who calls for Lincoln to be assassinated during the election of 1864. And there are people in here who contemplate Lincoln's assassination throughout the war. I mean, he knew people were saying these wretched, horrible things. And I think, I don't know how he would have responded to those sort of comments. I imagine, like most of us, if we hear something that's being said that we think is unfair, we want to respond. But Lincoln also had a surprising ability to not take every slight. And of course, we all know the famous story about George McClellan, where McClellan, blows past him when he's waiting in the parlor. And Lincoln was willing to hold the horse of a man who would just win victories. And so I think that, Lincoln knew this stuff was being said, and he probably would have taken it in stride.
What's surprising to me is that knowing that he was reviled by a fair number of people, that he still, in spite of that, had very little in the way of protection. I mean, he was accessible to most people throughout the war, and even right up to the end. It's surprising to me that he actually got all the way through the war without an attempt on his life, to be honest, knowing that there were these many people that didn't like him.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough. I hate that we're bumping up here against the end of our time. This is a fascinating book. You guys are wonderfully colorful and interesting hearing talk about it. I want to give you an opportunity to give any final parting thoughts or takeaways you hope come from this book, besides going out and buying it and getting a signed copy.
I mean, honestly, for my purposes, I've been using it in class. And for teachers, I think it can be a really valuable resource to get students into that world. And most of the quotes in the book range from 2 or 3 lines to maybe half a page, so they're digestible. And it's the kind of book that you can pick up and read a little bit of. And I'm using it in my classes. Actually, my students and I are going to start discussing it in a week and a half. And I'm really excited to be able to get them to grapple with the real stuff of history in a way that they don't get in other types of sources.
So I can't sign off without at least making a pitch, as I did to the eBay person. There's a number of people that now send me letters to transcribe as I become, since Spared and Shared is better known, people have reached out to me to share letters, and I try to take on any and all that I can. If you know of collections, private collections that have not been previously published, please get in touch with me at Spared and Shared. I'll do what I can to publish them. There are a number of book authors now that are using material from my Spared and Shared archives. They have come to realize that this is never before published fresh material that they can use for their books, and so there's been a number published in the last 2 or 3 years from that source. Okay.
John and Griff, thank you guys so much for joining us today.